What's up, everyone? Welcome to today's lecture. Before I begin, let me state that everyone can receive a free copy of today's lecture in audio format and/or ebook format. I encourage everyone to get both formats, as both formats are free, so you can read the transcript of today's lecture while you listen to the audio. I'll give out the information on how to receive it at the end of today's lecture. Also, if you agree with our proposal, visit us online at www.byronmichelgoines.com, spelled BYRONMESHELLEGOINES.com, and click on Universal Basic Income to read and sign our petition for $2,000 in monthly United States federal government guaranteed universal basic income for all poor and middle-class United States citizens at least 18 years of age, funded through the Federal Reserve System. Also, share this lecture with everyone you know and ask them to share it with everyone they know. It's time for universal basic income in the United States, and we want everyone in the United States to hear this lecture. Now, the title of today's lecture is Inflation, or are corporations using inflation as a scapegoat to raise prices for more profits? The subtitle of today's lecture is Proof Our Proposal for $2,000 in monthly universal basic income will not add to inflation. Before I begin, let me inform everyone that we are not Democrats and we are not Republicans. We are independents, and the ignorance of those on the right has to be addressed. As stated in the subtitle of today's lecture, our proposal is for $2,000 in monthly United States federal government guaranteed universal basic income for all poor and middle-class United States citizens at least 18 years of age, funded through the Federal Reserve System. We submitted our proposal via certified mail in February 2021 to President Joe Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, and others in Congress who would be receptive to our proposal. Our proposal was submitted through the First Amendment right to petition the government for a redress of grievances. We also submitted our proposal electronically in December 2020 to members of Congress who would be receptive to our proposal. We believe our proposal will address poverty in the United States in the way that it should be addressed, which I will prove in today's lecture. Now let's get started. Let me begin by stating that for those who may not know, universal basic income to cover children 17 years of age and younger currently exists in the United States, although it's not called universal basic income. Parents throughout the United States have been receiving monthly universal basic income covering children ages 17 and under since July 15, 2021, and it's called a child tax credit. Parents throughout the United States, regardless of political party affiliation, need the monthly child tax credit money as it is helping them where they would otherwise be struggling financially. And when they spend the money, they are stimulating the economy, which is an economic benefit that corporations throughout the United States enjoy. Under the American Rescue Plan, parents of children up to 5 years of age receive $300 per month per child, or $3,600 per child on an annual basis. Parents of children ages 6 through 17 receive $250 per month per child, or $3,000 per child on an annual basis. Republicans, Democrats, and independents throughout the United States are receiving the child tax credit universal basic income for their children through age 17. But if they wanted to continue in 2022 forward on a monthly basis instead of once a year, President Biden's Build Back Better plan will have to pass in the Senate. Hopefully, it will pass in the Senate, but the opposition to the legislation in the Senate shows the voters throughout the nation who really cares about the poor and middle class. Republicans in the House of Representatives voted against Build Back Better, but it still passed the House. And just as Republicans in the House voted against Build Back Better, Republicans in the Senate will undoubtedly do the same thing and vote against the best interests of their constituents by voting against Build Back Better. And this should show every Republican, Democrat, and Independent that Republicans gaining control of the House and Senate in 2022 will ensure that poor and middle class legislation will not be placed on the floor for a vote, because trickle-down economics for the rich will become a priority. And as a result, the poor and middle class will have to continue to endure trickle-down economics because President Joe Biden will be blocked from getting poor and middle class legislation through Congress so he can sign it into law. On the other hand, if Democrats maintain control of the House and Senate and increase their seats in the House and Senate, President Joe Biden will have the ability to get poor and middle class legislation through Congress so he can sign it into law. As I stated, President Biden's Build Back Better plan still has to pass in the Senate, and hopefully it will. It continues the current universal basic income that covers children 17 years of age and under, and has been unequivocally proven to work, which is why Democrats talk about how the child tax credit is helping families throughout the United States. Universal basic income does work. As I stated earlier, our proposal is for $2,000 in monthly United States federal government guaranteed universal basic income for all poor and middle class United States citizens at least 18 years of age, funded through the Federal Reserve System. Under our proposal, children will begin receiving the $2,000 monthly indexed to inflation when they reach the age of 18, which will help them as they begin their lives and will continue as they go throughout life. This will give them an economic floor as they go to college, start a business, or begin working a job to provide for themselves and their families. President Biden's Build Back Better plan covers monthly universal basic income for children 17 years of age and under. Our proposal for $2,000 monthly, indexed to inflation, funded through the Federal Reserve System, covers universal basic income for poor and middle class United States citizens at least 18 years of age. Our universal basic income proposal begins at age 18, and President Biden's Build Back Better plan for children ends at age 17. Both programs can work together to end poverty in the United States, making the United States the perfect template for other nations to follow to end poverty in their nations. It's time for the Democratic Party to make universal basic income part of the Democratic Party platform. I'll explain more later in the lecture concerning why the Democrats should do this. Now, since there are people on the right who believe our proposal for universal basic income will add to inflation, I will take the opportunity to debunk those people on the right in today's lecture. People on the right evidently don't care to think about Republican historical destruction of the United States economy, which I proved unequivocally through covering 3 times in United States history where Republican presidents were in the White House, and because of their economic policies, ideology, and lack of presidential leadership skills, they caused the stock market crash that contributed to the Great Depression, and they caused 2 Great Recessions. So for those of you who haven't heard, dig this. Republican presidents example number 1. Historically, 3 Republican presidents were in office prior to the stock market crash of 1929, after which the economic conditions that followed the stock market crash of 1929 contributed to the Great Depression. Back in 1929, the stock market was not properly regulated, and the laissez-faire capitalism, or free market capitalism, mindset was ingrained in the stock market due to Republican presidents who agreed with laissez-faire capitalism, or free market capitalism. Without proper regulation, speculators did whatever they chose to do concerning speculation, which ultimately caused the stock market crash of 1929. Proper stock market regulation didn't happen until the Democratic administration of Franklin D. Roosevelt, when the Securities and Exchange Commission was created in 1934. 3 Republican presidents were in office prior to the stock market crash of 1929. The first Republican president in the line was Warren G. Harding, who was president from 1921 to 1923. The second Republican president in the line was Calvin Coolidge, who was president from 1923 to 1929. The third Republican president in the line was Herbert Hoover, who was president from 1929 to 1933. The people undoubtedly had enough of Republican leadership, and Republican President Herbert Hoover was replaced by Democratic President Franklin D. Roosevelt. And during the Roosevelt administration, the Securities and Exchange Commission was created to regulate the stock market, and the FDIC, or Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, was created to insure deposits, because many banks failed as a result of speculation with depositors' money. Republican presidents resulted in the Great Depression. You dig? Republican president example number 2. George W. Bush was the Republican president in office during the financial crisis of 2008. How many people on the right remember George W. Bush? How many people on the right remember the Great Recession? How many people on the right remember the housing market bubble during the Bush administration that burst, resulting in bailouts for corporations? How many people on the right remember this? There were foreclosures all throughout the United States because it wasn't done the way it should have been done. According to a December 21st, 2008 New York Times article at www.nytimes.com entitled "Bush Drive for Home Ownership Fueled Housing Bubble," President George W. Bush stated the following words on October 15th, 2002. And I quote, "We can put light where there's darkness and hope where there's despondency in this country. And part of it is working together as a nation to encourage folks to own their own home." End of quote. George W. Bush had a conference on minority home ownership on October 15th, 2002. And corporations benefited through bailouts, while many people throughout the United States were foreclosed on. This is trickle-down economics. The George W. Bush administration didn't do it the way it should have been done. If George W. Bush wanted to encourage people to buy homes, they should have instituted universal basic income, which would have automatically increased home ownership through a trickle-up economy. If the George W. Bush administration would have done it the right way, through instituting universal basic income for all poor and middle-class United States citizens, there would have never been a 2008 financial crisis, and the objective of home ownership for the least of these would have been met. If the George W. Bush administration would have instituted universal basic income, it would have lifted the standard of living for United States citizens. Cities throughout the United States would have benefited greatly, as numerous homeless Americans would have left the streets because they would have had an apartment or house to live in. This would have lessened the amount of resources needed to address the homeless issue in cities throughout the United States. The real estate industry would have benefited greatly from a universal basic income program, as Americans who were unemployed and homeless would have went to apartment living and rental houses because they would have had an income, which would have increased the number of residents living in apartments and rental houses and would have benefited property owners and management companies as a result. There would have been more mortgages, as more homes would have been bought by universal basic income recipients, resulting in more business for everyone involved in the real estate industry, from the real estate investors to the new home builders and construction companies, to the real estate agents, to the banks and mortgage companies. This is the way it should have been done. You dig? Presidents and their advisors should look at history and learn from history. If the United States keeps doing the same thing, it's going to keep getting the same results. Now, concerning the top marginal tax rate. The top marginal tax rate is for the highest income. In 2020, the top marginal tax rate was 37% and was for individuals earning more than $518,400 and $622,050 for married couples filing jointly. Now, how many people on the right remembers the George W. Bush tax cuts for the rich? George W. Bush's father, President George Herbert Walker Bush, raised the top marginal tax rate on individual incomes from 28% to 31%. President Bill Clinton raised the top marginal tax rate on individual incomes from 31% to 39.6%. Both of these moves were good moves. President George W. Bush lowered the top marginal tax rate on individual incomes to 39.1%, and then again down to 38.6%. President George W. Bush then lowered the top marginal tax rate on individual incomes again down to 35%. Under President George W. Bush, there was also a reduction in the capital gains tax rate, which is the tax that individuals pay on gains in capital investments such as stocks or property, and the capital gains tax rate went down to 15%. Rich people benefited exponentially during the George W. Bush presidency. Corporate bailouts as a result of a burst housing market bubble, and tax cuts for the rich, courtesy of the George W. Bush administration. Republican president example number 3, Donald J. Trump. How many people on the right remember the Donald J. Trump tax cuts for the rich? The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 lowered the corporate tax rate from 35% down to 21%. And who did that benefit? The rich. And who was Trump looking out for when he made that drop to the corporate tax rate? Definitely not poor and middle class people. Also, as I stated concerning the George W. Bush administration, universal basic income, and the home ownership and rental market, it seems like Donald Trump, as a real estate investor, would have seen the enormous financial benefits to be gained in the real estate industry from a universal basic income program. But since Trump didn't see it, one of his advisors should have seen it and schooled him on it. Somebody in the Trump administration should have seen the enormous financial benefits to be gained in the real estate industry from a universal basic income program. And if universal basic income would have been instituted during the Trump administration, poor and middle class people throughout the United States would have automatically been helped financially through the COVID-19 pandemic. And as I stated earlier concerning George W. Bush, universal basic income would have increased the number of residents living in apartments and rental houses and would have benefited property owners and management companies as a result. There would have been more mortgages, as more homes would have been bought by universal basic income recipients, resulting in more business for everyone involved in the real estate industry, from the real estate investors to the new home builders and construction companies, to the real estate agents, to the banks and mortgage companies. Following Republican ideology concerning economic stimulus money is not the way to go. Democratic ideology concerning economic stimulus money is what helped Joe Biden win the election. Remember the state of Georgia and how the Democratic candidates' talk of economic stimulus money helped rally more people throughout the state to vote for the Democratic candidates. Concerning candidates to support or not support, if you're poor and middle class, why would you support someone who does not have your best interests at heart? It's time to think about your financial struggles and your family's financial struggles. And that begins with supporting candidates who have you and your family's best interests at heart. Never blindly support candidates out of ignorance. And remember, trickle-down economics don't work. For more information on trickle-down economics and trickle-up economics, visit us online at www.byronmichelgoins.com. Click on Universal Basic Income at the top in the navigation bar and scroll down and browse our video playlist in the upper right-hand corner of the video screen to select our trickle-down economics video and/or our trickle-up economics video. Now, let's move on. Remember, the title of today's lecture is Inflation, or are corporations using inflation as a scapegoat to raise prices for more profits? The subtitle of today's lecture is Proof Our Proposal for $2,000 in Monthly Universal Basic Income Will Not Add to Inflation. Now, I'm going to show you how everyone will benefit from our proposal for universal basic income with nobody left out. Now, it has been reported that President Joe Biden asked the Federal Trade Commission to check out oil and gas companies because there is a possibility that oil and gas companies are illegally raising prices. And for those of you who remember our lecture on capitalism entitled The Truth About Capitalism, the Federal Trade Commission was one of my examples to prove unequivocally that the United States hybrid economic system consists of regulated capitalism on the private side, as laissez-faire capitalism or free market capitalism, where there is no government interference, does not exist in the United States. In the United States, capitalism is regulated, hence the words regulated capitalism. So when someone attempts to tell you that capitalism is the economic system in the United States, you can call them on their lies and explain to them that the United States has a hybrid economic system consisting of regulated capitalism on the private side and socialism on the government side. For information concerning socialism in the United States, visit us online at www.byronmichelgoins.com and listen to our lecture entitled The Truth About Socialism, which explains socialism on the government side of the United States hybrid economic system. Now, if there is a possibility that oil and gas companies are illegally raising prices, which prompted President Biden to ask the Federal Trade Commission to check them out, could there be a possibility that other industries are doing the same thing? Capitalists and their corporations using inflation as a scapegoat to raise prices is definitely a possibility. And at the same time, capitalists and their corporations are using poor and middle class to produce the goods and provide the services, with the majority of the workers providing low-wage labor. So capitalists and their corporations benefit on both sides of the economic equation, as the poor and middle class provide the labor to produce the goods and provide the services, with the majority of the workers providing low-wage labor, while at the same time, the same poor and middle class are the customers who purchase the goods and services for the high prices set by the capitalists and their corporations. So who benefits? The capitalists and their corporations undoubtedly benefit exponentially from poor and middle class people. Let's look at grocery stores, for example. How many of you have noticed that grocery store prices have risen drastically? Is it inflation, or using inflation as a scapegoat through taking advantage of inflation to raise prices to higher than normal inflationary levels? And although some inflation is to be expected, how many of you have been noticing that your grocery bill is much higher than before the global pandemic? How many of you have seen your grocery bill go up by 25%? How many of you have seen your grocery bill go up by 50%? How many of you have seen your grocery bill go up by 75%? How many of you have seen your grocery bill go up by 100%? So the question remains, is it inflation, or are corporations using inflation as a scapegoat to raise prices for more profits? It is understandable that inflation is a normal part of the economic system in the United States. and inflation can be traced historically. And the economy has continued to work as inflation has risen throughout the years. So, for some examples, let's look at historical inflation in the United States. According to the Consumer Price Index Inflation Calculator, located on the Bureau of Labor Statistics website at www.bls.gov, $100 in August 1960 had the same buying power as $878.10 in August 2020. So in this example, a person would have had to spend $878.10 in August 2020 to buy what that person could have bought for $100 in August 1960. So from August 1960 to August 2020, there was a rise totaling $778.10. Let's cover another example in United States Consumer Price Index history from August 1913 to August 2020. $100 in August 1913 had the same buying power as $2,625.43 in August 2020. So in this example, a person would have had to spend $2,625.43 in August 2020 to buy what that person could have bought for $100 in August 1913. So from August 1913 to August 2020, there was a rise totaling $2,525.43. As this information clearly shows, inflation has gone up over the years, which is nothing new and will continue to happen as history has shown. But the economy has continued to work regardless of inflation. For those who cry inflation concerning $2,000 in monthly United States federal government guaranteed universal basic income for all poor and middle-class United States citizens at least 18 years of age, funded through the Federal Reserve System, they are wrong in their belief concerning our proposal for universal basic income adding to inflation. Now dig how this is going to work as I debunk the adding to inflation theory. There are already social welfare programs that exist in the United States that spend a lot of money each year to provide an economic floor to the least of these. But these programs don't work as they should in many instances. Our universal basic income program will make some of these social programs unnecessary and eliminate some problems with the current social welfare system, which I'll cover shortly. So there will be no adding to inflation, just replacing parts of the current welfare system that don't work properly, although big money is spent on them on an annual basis. In our proposal, individual poor and middle-class United States citizens will receive $2,000 per month directly from the federal government, which will replace the parts of the current social welfare system that don't work properly. Although these social welfare programs should remain for use by the United States federal government, even if they aren't being utilized. They should remain as an alternative social welfare program just in case a future administration with today's Republican ideology would end the $2,000 monthly universal basic income program. Although I don't believe the $2,000 monthly universal basic income program will ever end once the people start receiving $2,000 monthly indexed to inflation from the United States federal government. Just as in the case of Social Security, once the people realize the benefits of receiving $2,000 per month indexed to inflation from the United States federal government, the people will never let it stop. Poor and middle-class people will vote for the correct candidates to ensure poor and middle-class people continue to receive the $2,000 per month indexed to inflation. And as stated in our proposal, the $2,000 will be indexed to inflation as an economic precaution, so if inflation rises, the amount of $2,000 will increase. Our proposed program will not add to inflation because, first of all, it will replace but not eliminate current social welfare programs throughout the United States government social welfare system. And I say replace, but not eliminate, because the replaced programs need to remain for use, just in case a future administration with today's Republican ideology would end the $2,000 monthly universal basic income program. This is what I call a social welfare program failsafe. You dig? This also should be written in the legislation, as a fallback plan is absolutely necessary. This way, the people who qualify for the replaced programs will be able to receive help from those programs if the $2,000 monthly universal basic income program is ended. But as I stated earlier, I don't believe the $2,000 monthly universal basic income program will ever end. Once the people start receiving $2,000 monthly indexed to inflation from the United States federal government, just as in the case of Social Security. As far as money for the programs is concerned, the Federal Reserve would be the funding mechanism for the $2,000 monthly universal basic income program, and the Federal Reserve would be the funding mechanism for the social welfare programs. So the federal government would have immediate access to money to immediately put into those programs if they were restarted because of an administration with today's Republican ideology ending the $2,000 monthly universal basic income program. And for more information on Federal Reserve money creation, visit us online at www.byronmichelgoines.com and listen to our lecture entitled The Federal Reserve, Federal Government Deficit and Surplus, 1971 to 2020. This lecture proves unequivocally that the Federal Reserve creates money out of thin air through computer keystrokes and balance sheets, which makes it easy for the United States government to cover deficits through operating cash loans through the United States federal government's operating cash account with the Federal Reserve. The deficits add to the national debt, and once the tax revenue is spent, money is necessary for the United States government to continue operating. This is where the Federal Reserve System comes in the picture. The Federal Reserve, having the ability to create money at will out of thin air, is something everyone should dig. But there are people out there who want to end the Federal Reserve, which is not wise. Use the Federal Reserve to do good for the people, using the Federal Reserve money creation system to help the least of these. Don't throw away something that should be utilized for the common good of the people of the United States. Because as I'll prove later, everyone will benefit from our proposal for $2,000 in monthly United States federal government guaranteed universal basic income for all poor and middle class United States citizens at least 18 years of age, funded through the Federal Reserve System. The poor, middle class, and rich will benefit. And again, as I stated earlier, I don't believe the $2,000 monthly universal basic income program will ever end once the people start receiving $2,000 monthly indexed to inflation from the United States federal government. Just as in the case of Social Security, once the people realize the benefits of receiving $2,000 per month indexed to inflation from the United States federal government, the people will never let it stop. Poor and middle class people will vote for the correct candidates to ensure poor and middle class people continue to receive the $2,000 per month indexed to inflation. Secondly, the demand-based economic system will assist in causing inflation to stabilize to normal inflationary levels. U.S.-based suppliers are included in the demand-based system and will experience the benefits that will be experienced by corporations throughout the United States as a result of demand-side, bottom-up, trickle-up economics. The new economic system will have a positive effect on inflation. Also, concerning inflation, remember the title of today's lecture, Inflation, or are corporations using inflation as a scapegoat to raise prices for more profits? And this question remains because it seems like this is exactly what is going on in the United States. As far as offshore global supply chain issues are concerned, the moves being made by the Biden administration to address global supply chain issues through bringing supply chain infrastructure up to date are the correct moves to make. The infrastructure bill that was signed into law by President Biden in November 2021 will address global supply chain issues by addressing current issues with the infrastructure that is utilized to receive and distribute global supplies flowing into the United States from offshore. Also, other nations throughout the world are working to address supply chain issues, so things will undoubtedly get better concerning the global supply chain. Concerning the current United States social welfare programs, in many instances, they don't work as they should. And our proposal for $2,000 in monthly United States federal government guaranteed universal basic income for all poor and middle class United States citizens at least 18 years of age, funded through the Federal Reserve System, will correct the problems exhibited by the current social welfare programs that don't work, while at the same time addressing income inequality through poor and middle class United States citizens receiving $2,000 monthly directly from the United States federal government, with the addition of forcing corporations to pay living wages as a result of demand, which will ultimately benefit corporations and their employees, which I will explain later. Concerning the social welfare programs, the 2014 House Budget Committee report at republicans-budget.house.gov states the following information. Today, the federal government's anti-poverty programs are duplicative and complex. There are at least 92 federal programs designed to help lower-income Americans. For instance, there are dozens of education and job training programs, 17 different food aid programs, and over 20 housing programs. The federal government spent $799 billion on these programs in fiscal year 2012. Now, the federal government's anti-poverty programs are also known as entitlement programs, and the House Budget Committee website at republicans-budget.house.gov also states the following information. But rather than provide a roadmap out of poverty, Washington has created a complex web of programs that are often difficult to navigate. Some programs provide critical aid to families in need. Others discourage families from getting ahead. And for many of these programs, we just don't know. There's little evidence either way. This 2014 House Budget Committee report was approximately 8 years ago, and things still have not changed for the better concerning the United States anti-poverty or social welfare programs. It's time for $2,000 in monthly United States federal government guaranteed universal basic income for all poor and middle class United States citizens at least 18 years of age, funded through the Federal Reserve System. The 2014 House Budget Committee clearly stated, but rather than provide a roadmap out of poverty, Washington has created a complex web of programs that are often difficult to navigate. Some programs provide critical aid to families in need. Others discourage families from getting ahead. And for many of these programs, we just don't know. There's little evidence either way. Now, the way the federal government's anti-poverty programs discourage families from getting ahead is through the utilization of means testing, whereby if a single working mother is receiving assistance and she is given the opportunity for a different job that would include a small wage increase, and she accepts it, she is at risk for losing her benefits, which in many cases are more than she would have earned in a small wage increase. As a result, She declines the opportunity because she would have brought less money into her household by accepting the opportunity. She is discouraged by the federal government from increasing her income and moving up the ladder because her wages determine her benefit amount. Hence the words means testing. She has to provide for herself and her children, and it takes money to do that. Whatever brings in the most money is the way that she has to go. She is in need of more money, not less. Our proposed program for $2,000 in monthly United States federal government guaranteed universal basic income for all poor and middle class United States citizens at least 18 years of age, funded through the Federal Reserve System, would eliminate any means testing problems for people throughout the United States and enable people to gain upward mobility on their jobs, as they could accept all raises and still receive the $2,000 per month indexed to inflation. The goals of anti-poverty programs or social welfare programs are to help the least of these by providing an economic floor that is supposed to help the least of these go up the ladder in life, not cause stagnation for the least of these by causing the least of these to be stuck on a rung of the ladder in life. Now, the $2,000 per month will be funded through the Federal Reserve System, which will go a long way towards ending poverty in the United States without using taxpayer dollars, as the Federal Reserve creates money out of thin air through computer keystrokes and balance sheets. As I stated earlier, for more information on the Federal Reserve System of money creation, visit us online at www.byronmichelgoines.com and listen to our lecture entitled The Federal Reserve, Federal Government Deficit and Surplus, 1971 to 2020. Now, the $2,000 per month will generate a total of $24,000 annually for each poor and middle class United States citizen at least 18 years of age. And there will undoubtedly be millions of United States citizens working and looking for jobs, without the added stress of wondering how to make ends meet, as the $2,000 per month will be an economic floor that nobody should fall below, just as in the case of the current social welfare system, inclusive of cash assistance, SNAP, known as food stamps back in the day, WIC, and all other social welfare programs that exist in the social welfare system. The social welfare system has been around for a long time. Just look back to the Social Security Act of 1935, then go forward to the current date in the 21st century. And the economy has continued to work regardless of inflation. Concerning the Social Security Act of 1935, the United States Department of Health and Human Services website at aspe.hhs.gov states the following information. Aid to Families with Dependent Children, AFDC, was established by the Social Security Act of 1935 as a grant program to enable states to provide cash welfare payments for needy children who had been deprived of parental support or care because their father or mother was absent from the home, incapacitated, deceased, or unemployed. The Department of Health and Human Services website at aspe.hhs.gov further states, the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act of 1996 replaced AFDC, AFDC Administration, the Job Opportunities and Basic Skills Training Program, and the Emergency Assistance Program with the cash welfare block grant called the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families Program. Now, as the Department of Health and Human Services website states, aid to families with dependent children was changed to Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, or in other words, TANF, in 1996 through legislation entitled the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act of 1996. As I stated earlier, the social welfare system has been around for a long time. Just look back to the Social Security Act of 1935, then go forward to the current date in the 21st century. And the economy has continued to work regardless of inflation. Also, remember, as I stated earlier, inflation has gone up over the years, which is nothing new and will continue to happen as history has shown. And the social welfare programs have continued to give out cash assistance, SNAP, known as food stamps back in the day, WIC, and all other social welfare programs that exist in the United States social welfare system. And many of the people receiving assistance are working full-time in addition to receiving social welfare assistance. And the economy has continued to work. So don't let people scare you with the word inflation. Also, as I stated earlier, the $2,000 per month in universal basic income will be indexed to inflation as an economic precaution. So as inflation rises, the $2,000 per month in universal basic income will increase, just as Social Security is indexed to inflation. Remember the title of today's lecture: Inflation, or are corporations using inflation as a scapegoat to raise prices for more profits? Corporations are paying higher wages and still generating massive profits, which proves that they can pay higher wages in order to retain employees and cut down on employee turnover. On the supply side, supply chain issues pose a problem, and the inability to find employees to hire are what corporations are complaining about, because employees fit into the word supply by stocking shelves and doing what is necessary to meet customer demand. Supply-side goods received in a timely manner enable corporations to have goods in stock to meet customer demand. Employees enable corporations to meet customer demand through employee labor to stock the shelves and do the jobs related to meeting customer demand. And corporations are generating massive profits after they have raised wages to get and keep employees. Think about this. Corporations are paying higher wages in a global pandemic during inflation. When you hear politicians refer to GDP, they're referring to gross domestic product. According to the Bureau of Economic Analysis at www.bea.gov, gross domestic product is defined as a comprehensive measure of U.S. economic activity. GDP measures the value of the final goods and services produced in the United States without double counting the intermediate goods and services used up to produce them. Changes in GDP are the most popular indicator of the nation's overall economic health. Now, let me break the definition down some more for you. In other words, gross domestic product is a measurement of the total market value of all goods and services produced in the United States during a certain time frame, which is normally a year. GDP measurement is a formula looking at the total value of the final goods and final services, as it is the total market value of the completely finished goods and services produced in the United States. GDP is figured utilizing a formula that consists of consumption plus investment plus government plus the sum of exports minus imports. The X represents total exports and the M represents total imports, and the formula is C plus I plus G plus the sum of X minus M. Consumption represents all consumer spending, investment represents all business spending, government represents all government spending. Subtract your total imports from your total exports to get your net export number, then add everything together to get GDP. Now, let's move on. According to the Bureau of Economic Analysis website news release at www.bea.gov, entitled Gross domestic product, third quarter 2021, second estimate. Corporate profits, third quarter 2021, preliminary estimate. In the section entitled Gross Domestic Income and Corporate Profits, the following information is presented. Profits of domestic non-financial corporations increased $67.5 billion compared with an increase of $221.3 billion. Rest of the world profits increased $40.1 billion in contrast to a decrease of $6.2 billion. In the third quarter, receipts increased $43.1 billion and payments increased $3 billion. In the section entitled Updates to Second Quarter Wages and Salaries, the following information is presented. In addition to presenting updated estimates for the third quarter, today's release presents revised estimates of second quarter wages and salaries, personal taxes, and contributions for government social insurance based on updated data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics Quarterly Census of Employment and Wages Program. Wages and salaries are now estimated to have increased $301.1 billion in the second quarter, an upward revision of $101.3 billion. Now, this wages and salaries information from the Bureau of Economic Analysis is revised from the second quarter to show the correct numbers, and wages and salaries have increased in the revised amount of $101.3 billion, which increases the wages and salaries to a total of $301.1 billion. Wages have definitely increased throughout the United States. Demand is up because of supply chain issues, and corporations are paying higher wages and still generating massive profits. Our proposal for $2,000 in monthly United States federal government guaranteed universal basic income for all poor and middle-class United States citizens at least 18 years of age, funded through the Federal Reserve System, is demand-based, bottom-up, trickle-up economics, and will work to benefit corporations and employees. Demand will be met by supply as a result of $2,000 in monthly United States federal government guaranteed universal basic income for all poor and middle-class United States citizens at least 18 years of age, funded through the Federal Reserve System. Economic stimulation will result from the spending of the money by the poor and middle class. The poor and middle class spending of the money will create a demand for goods and services, which will force capitalists and their corporations to offer good-paying jobs to enable them to meet the demand. Some of this is happening now, as I have proven earlier in today's lecture. Capitalists will be forced to use the money for their corporations. And this is demand-side economics, or trickle-up economics, or bottom-up economics. Millions of poor and middle-class United States citizens will accept the good-paying jobs that are offered, automatically resulting in a lower turnover rate concerning employees and benefiting capitalists and their corporations. And capitalists and their corporations will still be generating massive profits above and beyond the profits they normally generate, which will enable them to pay higher wages. And when I say higher wages, I'm talking about a $22 per hour minimum. And the massive profits generated through the economic stimulation benefiting corporations through $2,000 in monthly United States federal government guaranteed universal basic income for all poor and middle class United States citizens at least 18 years of age, funded through the Federal Reserve System, will enable the corporations to cover $22 per hour and still generate massive profits. There are corporations today in the United States who are unintentionally being subsidized by the United States federal government through social welfare programs because they are not paying their employees a living wage. They have employees who are receiving welfare while at the same time working 40 hours or more per week for low wages. So the corporations are getting over on their employees and they are getting over on the United States federal government. Our proposed universal basic income program is demand-based. We'll force capitalists and their corporations to pay living wages to meet the demand. As a result, we'll benefit the employees, the capitalists, and their corporations, and will ultimately stop the unintentional United States federal government subsidizing of corporations through social welfare programs, and will benefit everyone from the bottom of the economic ladder to the top of the economic ladder. The poor and middle class will be happy. The capitalists will be happy. And the shareholders will be happy. Everyone will get a piece of the pie. Everyone will be able to eat off the fat of the land. You dig? Let me also say that I believe the United States government subsidizing of corporations through social welfare programs is unintentional. But the system is being used this way by corporations, and it is in need of change. The United States government can only do what the people who are in government enable it to do. And concerning the United States social welfare system, nothing needed to be done to enable unintentional United States government subsidizing of corporations through social welfare programs. Social welfare programs exist to help the least of these, and corporations took advantage of it. Those in Congress who agree with it just said nothing and did nothing to address it. They allowed the federal minimum wage to stay where it was and is, and didn't make a move to address it, which enabled the corporations to do whatever they wanted concerning wages, and therefore left the door wide open for continued unintentional United States government subsidizing of corporations through social welfare programs. And it is currently going on today, and it is time for a change. I've already established the fact that corporations will generate massive profits from the $2,000 in monthly universal basic income paid to all poor and middle-class United States citizens at least 18 years of age, funded through the Federal Reserve System, which will enable corporations to pay $22 per hour and still generate massive profits. Now, let's look at how $2,000 in monthly United States federal government guaranteed universal basic income for all poor and middle-class United States citizens at least 18 years of age, funded through the Federal Reserve System, and a $22 per hour wage will benefit the workers. Workers will be receiving work income of $880 per week at $22 per hour for 40 hours in a week. So in total, with the workers receiving $2,000 per month in universal basic income and a job earning $22 per hour at 40 hours per week, the workers will individually receive a minimum of $69,760 annually in income, which is a living income, and will address United States poverty in the way that it should be addressed. Our proposal for $2,000 in monthly United States federal government guaranteed universal basic income for all poor and middle-class United States citizens at least 18 years of age, funded through the Federal Reserve System, has never been done before in the United States. So nobody can say that it won't work. In fact, it will work and will do more to boost the economy of the United States than anything else that has ever been attempted concerning economics in the United States to date. This will be a game changer in the United States concerning its economic system. And the United States can be utilized as a template for other nations to follow to end poverty in their nations. This will change the system from trickle-down economics that don't work and only benefit the rich to trickle-up economics that benefit the poor, middle class, and rich, as the rich will get their benefits on the back end through the massive profits they'll generate after $2,000 in monthly United States federal government guaranteed universal basic income for all poor and middle class United States citizens at least 18 years of age, funded through the Federal Reserve System, is law, and corporations are paying a $22 per hour living wage minimum. It's time for the United States to change to trickle-up economics. You dig? In conclusion, concerning the Federal Reserve System, the $2,000 per month will be funded through the Federal Reserve System, which will go a long way towards ending poverty in the United States without using taxpayer dollars, as the Federal Reserve creates money out of thin air through computer keystrokes and balance sheets. This is important information that everyone should know. And as I stated earlier, for more information on the Federal Reserve System of money creation, visit us online at www.byronmichelgoines.com and listen to our lecture entitled The Federal Reserve, Federal Government, Deficit and Surplus, 1971 to 2020. The Federal Reserve will be the funding mechanism, and it should be utilized to do two things that will get the United States on the right path. The first thing is to utilize the Federal Reserve to fund $2,000 in monthly United States federal government guaranteed universal basic income for all poor and middle class United States citizens at least 18 years of age. The second thing is to utilize the Federal Reserve to pay off the national debt. There is no need for the United States to have a debt-driven economic system. The United States dollar has no gold backing its value, as President Richard Nixon ended the gold standard in 1971, and the United States dollar is still strong. Pay off the national debt through the Federal Reserve and watch the United States prosper more than it ever has. There is no need for a federal deficit, so drop the cash operating loans through the United States federal government operating cash account with the Federal Reserve and start operating cash through the United States federal government operating cash account with the Federal Reserve. As the United States federal government is enabled to get operating cash as needed through the Federal Reserve, but not in the form of a loan. Money created out of thin air through computer keystrokes for the purpose of United States federal government operating cash when needed. It's time for an economic change in the United States. As I stated earlier, if the United States keeps doing the same thing, it's going to keep getting the same results. Republican President Richard Nixon was considering a universal basic income program, and he was advised against it. And just think about where the United States would be today economically if the Nixon administration would have implemented a universal basic income program. Remember, Republican President George W. Bush used trickle-down economics, which led to a housing market bubble that burst and people were foreclosed on and put out of their homes, while corporations received bailouts paid for by the poor and middle class. When President George W. Bush should have used trickle-up economics and instituted a universal basic income program that would have met the same home ownership objective without a housing market bubble. Just because a United States federal universal basic income program has never been done does not mean that it should not be done. And for Republicans and right-wingers who constantly talk about socialism coming to the United States, socialism has existed for generations in the United States on the government side of the United States hybrid economic system. And regulated capitalism has existed for generations on the private side of the United States hybrid economic system. The United States hybrid economic system is made up of two parts, which are the government side and the private side. And for irrefutable proof concerning the United States hybrid economic system, visit us online at www.byronmichelgoines.com and listen to our lectures entitled The Truth About Socialism and The Truth About Capitalism and the United States Socialism and Regulated Capitalism. Democrats, remember the words of President Lyndon B. Johnson concerning ending poverty in the United States. According to a 2014 House Budget Committee report at republicans-budget.house.gov entitled The War on Poverty 50 Years Later, President Lyndon B. Johnson stated the following words in his 1964 book entitled My Hope for America, and I quote, "We have declared unconditional war on poverty. Our objective is total victory. I believe that 30 years from now, Americans will look back upon these 1960s as the time of the great American breakthrough toward the victory of prosperity over poverty." End of quote. President Johnson stated, "We have declared unconditional war on poverty." Merriam-Webster's online dictionary defines unconditional as not conditional or limited. In other words, the war on poverty is not subject to any conditions. President Johnson knew that the war on poverty would need many great ideas and legislative efforts to bring the desired results. According to the House Budget Committee website at republicans-budget.house.gov, President Lyndon B. Johnson stated the following words in his 1964 State of the Union address, and I quote, "Our aim is not only to relieve the symptom of poverty, but to cure it, and above all, to prevent it. No single piece of legislation, however, is going to suffice." End of quote. President Johnson's statement in and of itself proved that the war on poverty was going to be one in which other pieces of legislation would be necessary to relieve, cure, and prevent poverty. And Democrats, now is the time to take the opportunity to relieve, cure, and prevent poverty in the United States. Don't be afraid to initiate $2,000 in monthly United States federal government guaranteed universal basic income for all poor and middle-class United States citizens at least 18 years of age, funded through the Federal Reserve System. And contrary to popular belief, there are undoubtedly Republicans and right-wingers who are struggling financially along with their families. And some of them are homeless. And they privately support the idea of universal basic income, although they won't say it publicly because they walk the Republican ideological line concerning universal basic income. There is no doubt that if Democrats initiate universal basic income, they will pick up Republican voters who cross the line and vote Democrat because they want to continue getting universal basic income if it has already been made law, or they'll want to get it if it is being promoted by Democrats to make it law. Democrats control both houses of Congress and the office of the president. And as I stated earlier, it's time for the Democratic Party to make universal basic income part of the Democratic Party platform. Democrats, do this and you will make history. And the United States will be an example to the world on how to end poverty and end national debt. There are future elections coming, and if poor and middle class people want a government that focuses on the poor and middle class instead of the rich, voting for Republican candidates is not the way to go. It is clear that the Republican Party and the Democratic Party are the two main political parties in the United States. But Republican actions when in leadership has favored the rich over the poor and middle class, even when Republicans stated they were attempting to help the poor and middle class. Remember President George W. Bush, minority home ownership, the housing market bubble that burst, and the corporate bailouts for corporations, while people throughout the United States were foreclosed on and put out of their homes? Remember that? The people, through voting against all Republican candidates and voting for their choice of the other candidates, can force the Republican Party to return to its historical roots as a party for the least of these, if it is wise. And it's going to take the people to bring change to the Republican Party. Once the Republican Party begins to lose power at federal, state, and local levels, the Republican Party will return to its historical roots as a party for the least of these, if it is wise. Frederick Douglass stated the following words, and I quote, "Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will." End of quote. Frederick Douglass was exactly right. Now, the demand will consist of the people voting against all Republican candidates, which will begin the process of removing federal, state, and local power from Republicans and giving the power to those who work for the least of these. After this goes on for a period of time and the Republican Party sees that they are losing power throughout the United States as a result of poor and middle-class people voting against them in favor of candidates who work for the least of these, they will eventually concede to the demand and return to their Republican Party roots of being a party for the least of these if they are wise. In my opinion, if Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln were living today, they would not be Republicans. And as a result, they would not be voting for Republican candidates. Also, today's Republican Party has white supremacists as supporters, as proven in today's pro-Trump faction of the Republican Party, along with United States Republican Party history. A white supremacist segment of United States society has been ingrained in the Republican Party for generations. The white Southern segregationist, Senator Strom Thurmond, who ran for president in 1948, filibustered the Civil Rights Act of 1957, left the Democratic Party, and became a Republican in 1964, and afterwards, as a Republican, Thurmond voted against the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Strom Thurmond had supporters who followed him into the Republican Party, as well as there were people all throughout the South with the segregationist mindset who became Republicans when the Democratic Party endorsed civil rights for black people. This is a reason why the Republican Party is as big as it is in the South and has as much power as it does in the South. And if the Republican Party does not change back to the Republican Party of Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln, the Republican Party risks following in the footsteps of the Whig political party, which no longer exists. For those who may not know, prior to the start of the Republican Party by abolitionists, there was a political party called the Whig Party, which contained pro-slavery white supremacists and abolitionists. The Democratic Party was the other major political party, and it was a pro-slavery white supremacist political party. But today's Democratic Party completely changed from its historical roots generations ago. And today's Democratic Party supports civil rights for black people and voting rights for black people. And today's Democratic Party supports helping poor and middle-class people through laws designed to address economic inequities that exist. Now, continuing on with some Whig Party history, there was a split in the Whig Party between the abolitionists and pro-slavery white supremacists concerning slavery. And as a result, the abolitionists left the Whig Party and started a brand new political party, which they named the Republican Party. Abraham Lincoln was selected as the Republican Party's first candidate for president of the United States. The popularity of the Republican Party grew as it replaced the Whig Party as the other major political party in the United States. The Whig Party eventually disappeared from existence, leaving the Republican Party and the Democratic Party as the two major political parties in the United States. Today's Republican Party is in the same shape the Whig Party was in back then before its collapse. And the question is, will the Republican Party have the same ending as the Whig Party? Only time will tell, but this opens the door for a Republican who wants the Republican Party to return to its historical roots as a party that Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln would support, to start a brand new political party. And it's going to take someone with the courage, boldness, and access to funding in today's political system to start a new political party from scratch. But it can be done. People have left the Republican Party, and there are undoubtedly well-known Republicans out there who can start a new political party and may take up the cause of starting a new political party to replace the Republican Party. If there was ever a time in United States history where the opportunity exists to start a new political party to replace the Republican Party, The time is now. Because the Republican Party of Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln does not exist today. The Republican Party of Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln was a party for the least of these. And today's Republican Party has a long way to go to reach its historical roots as a party for the least of these. Remember the three examples given earlier where Republican presidents were in office and their economic policies, ideology, and lack of presidential leadership skills caused the stock market crash that contributed to the Great Depression, and they caused 2 great recessions. And concerning the Democratic Party, for the people who are wondering if there are any Democrats who need to be voted out of office, there are Democrats in Congress who don't support poor and middle class legislation that they should support. And it's probably because of the districts they represent, where people are more conservative. But it's time for congressional representatives to do what is in the best interest of the poor and middle class people in their districts. And if conservative district congressional representatives would give a thorough explanation to their constituents on how social welfare programs for the poor and middle class, such as universal basic income, would not cause inflation and would directly benefit their constituents, they would see that the majority of their constituents would agree with them in their support of social welfare programs, such as universal basic income. They have to do their due diligence on the social welfare program they support. And they have to convey the information to their constituents in a thorough, easy to understand format. Congressional representatives have to be able to rebut any constituent with irrefutable facts that will persuade other constituents in the meeting to support them as they push for passage of the social welfare program. It's about persuading the constituents to support a social welfare program that will directly benefit the constituents while not adding to inflation. There will undoubtedly be Republicans and Democrats in the meeting, and thorough explanations will be needed to convince the constituents. And if it is explained thoroughly with irrefutable rebuttals to constituents as necessary, there are undoubtedly conservatives who will support them as they push for passage of the social welfare program. And I'm talking about conservative Democrats and conservative Republicans, because money issues are a real thing in the lives of Democrats, Republicans, and independents throughout the United States. As I stated earlier, it begins with the congressional representative giving a thorough explanation of the benefits of the social welfare program, just like I'm doing in today's lecture. This is what they should do when they meet with constituents. Now, concerning voting congressional representatives out of office who won't support social welfare programs they should support, they do need to be voted out of office and replaced with people who have a least of these mindset concerning poor and middle class people in the United States and who will support social welfare program legislation that will benefit the poor and middle class constituents in their districts without adding to inflation. So new representatives should be running for congressional office to replace the congressional representatives who are applying brakes to the poor and middle class progress that can be made through social welfare program legislation that will benefit the poor and middle class. And the congressional representatives who apply brakes to the poor and middle class progress that can be made do it because of the districts they represent and/or because they're afraid to lose their seats in Congress. Although some may say they're not afraid of losing their seats in Congress. And the only way to change this is to elect new congressional representatives to replace them. As I stated earlier, if the United States keeps doing the same thing, it's going to keep getting the same results. The purpose of today's lecture is to address inflation in the United States and show how our universal basic income proposal will not add to inflation, while at the same time benefit the poor, middle class, and rich. Today's lecture also covered other important information to consider. We're offering this lecture free of charge in audio that you can download or listen to online, and or in ebook format that you can download or read online. The reason we're offering today's lecture free of charge is because we want everyone in the United States to hear it and or read the transcript. Share today's lecture with everyone you know so they can make an informed decision concerning whether they support our proposal for $2,000 in monthly United States federal government guaranteed universal basic income for all poor and middle class United States citizens at least 18 years of age, funded through the Federal Reserve System. If you agree with our proposal, visit us online at www.byronmichelgoines.com, spelled BYRONMESHELLEGOINES.com, and click on Universal Basic Income to read and sign our petition for $2,000 in monthly United States federal government guaranteed universal basic income for all poor and middle class United States citizens at least 18 years of age, funded through the Federal Reserve System. To get your free copy of today's lecture, visit us online at www.byronmichelgoines.com and click on Shop or Shop Now, and under BGMG Productions Digital Media, click on Lectures and Sermons or eBooks under All Products for your free copy of today's lecture entitled Inflation, or Are Corporations Using Inflation as a Scapegoat to Raise Prices for More Profits? The subtitle of today's lecture is Proof Our Proposal for $2,000 in Monthly Universal Basic Income Will Not Add to Inflation. Feel free to download both formats, the audio and the ebook, so you can read the transcript while you listen to the audio. Also, for those of you who enjoy listening to hip-hop, feel free to browse our selection of conscious hip-hop and Christian hip-hop. Everything on our website has free samples, so you can listen to or read a free sample before you make a purchase. And I'm going to spell our website address again for those who may not have written it down yet. Our website address is spelled BYRONMESHELLEGOINES.com. We thank you for your time.